Let's clear something up right away. Spartan women were not the quiet, soft-spoken wives Hollywood loves to throw into the background while their husbands go off to war. No, they weren't at home weaving and crying. They were too busy owning land, managing slaves, verbally castrating politicians, and producing warriors with wombs tougher than most modern gym bros. In fact, while the rest of ancient Greece was out here treating women like decorative potted plants, Sparta said, "Hold my bronze goblet," and raised girls to run, wrestle, shout at kings, and train naked. Yes, naked, in front of the entire community. Modesty, not a thing. Submissiveness, you're adorable. These women were bred to be blunt, bold, and biologically terrifying. They didn't need swords. They gave birth to swordsmen. And here's the kicker. They had more rights than most women would get until about 2,000 years later. That's right. Land ownership, inheritance, divorce rights. And if their husbands didn't satisfy them, there were laws for that too. Stay with me, because what we're about to dive into isn't just another rah-rah Sparta story. It's a full-scale reality check on what life was actually like for Spartan women. What they ate, how they trained, how they terrified men. And why, if you time-traveled back to ancient Laconia, the person you'd be most afraid of probably wasn't wearing armor. She was giving birth to it. Chapter 1. Birth of a Spartan Girl, not for the weak. So you think being born in ancient Sparta was a blessing? Sure, if your definition of a blessing includes a government-approved eugenics program. When a Spartan child was born, they weren't handed a blanket and cuddled. They were inspected, like livestock. If the baby looked weak, sickly, or imperfect, goodbye. Off the cliff of Mount Tagetus you go. Yes, really. Infanticide wasn't just allowed, it was institutionalized. But if the baby girl passed the test, she wasn't treated like a delicate flower. She was raised like a small soldier. From a young age, Spartan girls trained alongside boys, running, wrestling, throwing javelins, and doing it all under the blazing sun with zero body shame, because Sparta didn't have time for modesty or insecurity. You were expected to grow strong, fast, loud, and unshakable. You were not born to please men. You were born to birth warriors. And that meant being a warrior in your own right. If this all sounds extreme, good. That's because it was. Spartan society believed strong mothers made strong sons, and they weren't wrong. But the psychological cost? Well, let's talk about that next. Chapter 2. Motherhood as a blood sport. Forget diapers and lullabies. In Sparta, motherhood was not a gentle act. It was a national duty, a political act, a battlefield of the body. You didn't get pregnant for love. You got pregnant because the state needed warriors. And if you couldn't produce a strong child, you were seen as a liability. There were state-sanctioned pairings, ceremonies for breeding, and zero sympathy for women who died in childbirth. In fact, childbirth and war were the only two ways a Spartan could earn a marked grave. That's right, if you died giving birth, you were considered equal in honor to a warrior who fell in battle. Let that sink in. Spartan women were praised for their toughness in labor. Crying out, weak, complaining, shameful, dying with dignity, that was the ideal. And here's a nice psychological twist. Your worth was measured by the strength of your sons. If they died bravely, you were honored. If they ran from battle, you were disgraced. Sound like pressure? It was a full-blown national performance of stoicism and maternal. Chapter 3. education, training, and the female Agogi. While other Greek girls were learning how to weave and obey, Spartan girls were doing squats, throwing discus, and being publicly graded on their physical strength. They didn't just train their bodies. They were expected to speak up, debate, and be intellectually sharp. Sarcasm was practically a sport. Ever heard the phrase, "come back with your shield or on it"? That was a Spartan mother, not a general. Spartan girls went through their own version of the Agogi, the brutal training regime the boys endured. But with a twist. Their training emphasized physical endurance and public speaking. Why? Because one day they'd be running the estate, managing helots, raising future soldiers, and possibly slapping a king with a rhetorical dagger if he acted stupid. Women were expected to have opinions, loud ones, and no one batted an eye when they used them. This wasn't feminism, it was function, and it made them terrifyingly competent. Chapter 4: Marriage and Reproduction Laws. Or how cheating became civic duty. Now, imagine you're a Spartan woman. You've made it through training, you're physically powerful, and the state decides it's time for you to breed. Romance? That's cute. You're not marrying for love. You're marrying to serve the state. Marriage in Sparta was a strategic operation. Men lived in barracks until age 30, so they weren't exactly around to wine and dine you. Couples would meet in secret. Husbands would sneak out from the barracks, sleep with their wives in the dark, and then scurry back to their units before sunrise. If that sounds dystopian, don't worry. It gets better. Or worse, depending on how you feel about communal matchmaking. If a man was strong but married to a woman who couldn't conceive, he could be told to sleep with another woman. Likewise, if a woman was healthy and married to a less than impressive specimen, she could be lent out to a better breeder. This was not scandal. This was policy. And while the rest of Greece was obsessed with virginity and female purity, Sparta said, "Screw that. Give us strong kids." There were even cases of polyandry. Yes, some women had multiple husbands, and nobody blinked. Marriage wasn't sacred. It was a state-sponsored eugenics lab. Coming up next, what Spartan women ate, drank, and how their lifestyle kept them stronger than most modern athletes. Chapter 5: Food, Fitness, and Daily Life. How to eat like a warrior without a shield. Here's a shocking fact you didn't expect. Spartan women were actually well fed. Not indulgently, but nutritionally. Because if your job is to pop out the next generation of soldiers, you don't do it on an empty stomach. Unlike most Greek women who were often half-starved and sedentary, Spartan girls ate barley, cheese, figs, and meat. They drank diluted wine and were encouraged to eat in public. Gasp, yes, a woman eating in public. Somewhere in Athens, a man just fainted. Food wasn't just sustenance, it was preparation. You were training, always training. Not for beauty, for battle. Their bodies were lean, strong, sunburnt, and built to survive childbirth and hard labor. Spartan women didn't sit still. They walked everywhere, wrestled, hunted, managed estates, and likely tossed a few helots around when necessary. Their daily lives were harsh but balanced. They had fewer restrictions than women in any other part of Greece. They didn't just survive, they ruled in absence. They kept Sparta running while the men were away playing death games in foreign lands. Chapter 6: Power and Property, when women ruled the economy. Another surprise, by the Hellenistic period, Spartan women owned up to 2/3 of all the land in Sparta. How? Because when men died in war, which they did, a lot, their property passed to their wives or daughters. While Athenian women were considered property, Spartan women had property. They managed estates. They gave orders. They were, legally speaking, some of the wealthiest women in the ancient world. This economic power gave them a voice, and you better believe they used it. They could sue. They could inherit. They could bequeath. Spartan women could even choose to divorce. And if they did, they didn't lose their assets. Imagine that in a world where women were often sold off with dowries and traded like livestock, Spartan women were flipping the script, and no one dared to stop them. Chapter 7: 3 Shocking Facts They Never Taught You in School. Spartan women could legally insult men in public. Not only could they speak their minds, they were expected to roast men who showed cowardice or poor leadership. Imagine being dragged by your own mom in front of the army. That's Sparta. They trained in the nude alongside men. Not for sexualization, for equality. Physical ability was paramount, and body shame? That was a foreign concept. If you were weak, you were shamed. Not for your body, but for lacking discipline. They were feared more than foreign invaders. Some sources say helots feared the wrath of Spartan women more than the soldiers. These women had authority, weapons access, and zero patience for rebellion. Chapter 8: The Legacy They Left Behind. When Sparta finally fell and the rest of the world moved on, Spartan women faded into myth. But make no mistake, they were very real. They weren't feminists. They weren't activists. They were instruments of a militarized society, molded to serve a brutal ideal. And in that role, they wielded power that most women wouldn't taste again for centuries. Their legacy isn't in poetry or temples. It's in the terror they inspired, the sons they raised, and the rare, razor-sharp glimpse they gave the world of what happens when women are allowed, no, expected, to be strong. So the next time someone says, "Behind every great man is a great woman," remember, in Sparta, she wasn't behind him. She was beside him. Or more likely, in front of him, shouting commands. If you made it this far, you now know why Spartan women were more than just supporting characters in history. They were landowners, mothers, athletes, commanders, and state-sanctioned badasses. So before you quote the 300 and yell, "This is Sparta," maybe remember who trained the guy yelling it in the first place. Thanks for watching. Hit like, subscribe to Warrior Wibjorn, and leave a comment below. Would you have survived as a Spartan woman? See you in the next battle.